Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today, I have with me Dr. Christopher Jochum, who is the chair of the Department of Teacher Education at Fort Hays State University, where my husband, by the way, went to school for undergrad. So that's kind of fun. We can talk about that in a minute. But anyway, he leads a large teacher preparation program with over 1,000 students. And he holds a PhD in curriculum and instruction from Kansas State University and a master's and bachelor's degree in education from the University of Nebraska at Kearney, and has just written a book that is coming out tomorrow as when we publish this episode. It's called The Department Chair, A Practical Guide to Effective Leadership. So, Chris, great to have you here with us on the Voice of Influence podcast.
Well, hey, great to be here, and very, very thankful for the opportunity, Andrea. I've been following you online, and continued congrats to you and all the great stuff you're doing for people. So again, just thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we have a few fun connections. So I went to University of Nebraska at Kearney for the last couple of years of my education. So I graduated from there for music education, actually. So
yeah, we do. It's a small world, and we'll probably talk about leadership and the value of people helping and mentoring others, but it speaks volumes to you and your character, because I kind of sent you it's not a cold call, but what do they call it? A cold Facebook message, because I've been following your podcast for a while now, because one of our mutual connections, Dr. Neil Schnorr, has been on it a couple times. And the other connection, not only with your husband at Fort Hays, but obviously my wife went to UNK and was a music ed major. And so there's kind of that connection of influence as well. And just so your listeners know, I sent you a message just saying, hey, I'm getting, having a book come out. You've been there, done that. Any advice you could give me, because I'm out of my league here. And thank you again. You set up a Zoom call and gave me some great tips, and then it invited me to do this. So it's always a small world, and it speaks to how you help people and your mentoring.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I really love helping people connect their gifts with the need in the world. And there's so much need. And it's so interesting, your book being about department chairs. I'm curious, even let's just get going with that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what is the need? Why did you write a book about being a department chair?
Well, a couple things. I've heard, probably as you do, I listen to different podcasts and read different things, both related to leadership and higher ed. And I heard it said sometime, you probably heard this too, is oftentimes we write the books that we wish we had. And so, and I say in the book, my philosophy when I used to teach future teachers methods courses, I don't do as much of that now, is if I tell you to do something or I give you advice, please know it's because I probably did it wrong and wish somebody would have told me. So just, it's kind of like we try to tell our children, hey, I've been down that road. So first and foremost, as somebody in higher ed, I think most of the time writing a book, at least for me, was like, wow, if I could ever do that, I don't know if I'll have enough to say. So it was always a goal to write a book. And then I have just always, looking back on my life, been intrigued by leadership, and not within any organization. It probably wasn't when I was 8 or 9 years old. I willingly read More Than Winning by Tom Osborne. Now, what 8-year-old reads that? But I just, without realizing it, I like the process. I like influence. And so, first of all, I always wanted to write a book. I think it's safe to say across the country, there's a need for good leadership. And I don't say that to say people that are in it are necessarily bad. I think it can be an acquired skill. It's a lot like teaching. There's that delicate balance between how much is art and how much is science. Right. And I realized early on, luckily I got into the chair position for the right reasons, but much like when you decide to have children, even if you have them for the right reasons, before you even get them home from the hospital, you're like, oh boy, all those things we read and said, that's different, right? And so I went to a conference my first year for academic chairs, and it was very eye-opening. Hey, this is a field of study. There is a need. And then I went to a training seminar one summer for chairs in higher ed, obviously, and just the stories, man, well,
Mm.
I didn't want, the dean talked me into it, and I'm kind of scared, and I don't know how to do this. And so I think, again, it was something that I wanted to help people. Big picture, if I can help somebody, not just in higher ed, but I think at least within the realm of education, be it K-12, I just put stuff in here that I think would help people.
Hmm. Do you think that you're just like, even as that kid, that 8-year-old who read the Tom Osborne book about leadership, do you think that you had just this innate desire, not just for leadership, but for a teaching kind of leadership?
Yeah, I think, and I would even just say, you could just say teaching,
Mm,
because as you know, anybody who is a teacher is a leader. It's a package
mm,
deal.
mm,
And because, my definition of influence or leadership is influence through service, character, courage, relationships. And you know it as well as anyone. You cannot stand in front of a group of middle schoolers with noisemakers in their hands and get them to perform as an ensemble and do all those things unless you can influence those children. And so I always knew, I think, and I don't come from a family of educators, but I think I was always drawn to teaching.
mm.
At a young age, I thought I would probably spend my career as a high school teacher and coach. I got the high school teacher part right, but I was never able to coach. And so, yeah, I was just always drawn to, I was the one that would organize the Sandlot football games and, call kids and make a list of who could be there and this and that. And so I think looking back on it, I at least had an interest in it. Sure.
Hmm. Yeah. I think it's interesting. I think that there are some people who want to tell people how to be. Other people want to teach. I don't know if there's that distinction between sort of being a prophet and a teacher,
Yeah.
or, that sort of thing. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to lead, but I like the idea that being a teacher and being a leader are a package deal. That makes sense.
Yeah. Because part of influencing people is, and teaching, I have learned that I didn't realize this 20 some plus years ago when I decided to study education. But I think those of us that went through K-12 training and even taught in the public schools, I do think that we have an advantage when it comes to leading organizations that are presumably occupied by adults, because some of the things that we learn to influence behavior in a positive way work everywhere.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, let's be honest, what you learn in the public schools is you cannot physically force a human being to do something they don't want to do. At least if you want to, I don't know, not break the law. But so
Yeah.
when we realize that influence, our hands are tied. So how do you influence another person if you're coaching a child, you can put your hands on their shoulders and say, I want you here.
Mm-hmm.
But in an organizational setting, what do we have to influence people? Well, we
Mm.
have our words, we have our communication, we have our relationships. And so I do think that my background, mainly as a high school teacher, helps me because I've had difficult conversations. I've had
Yeah.
to talk to community members, principals, et cetera. So I do think maybe it's a somewhat of a plug for the teaching profession, but I do think if you stay in it for very long, you're a leader.
Mm. Let's dig into the book a little bit.
Sure.
So one of the things that I've frequently seen is that subject matter experts are often really good with their content. They know a
Mhm.
lot about their expertise. And so then that kind of puts them automatically into a leadership position. That's the next level up, is to get into a leadership position, but it's not necessarily always a great fit. So at the beginning of your book, you talk about some statistics and the importance of the role, but there's also this conflict with not everybody knows how to do it. So can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, it's a very, very unique leadership position from when I really started doing research. Very unique because it's middle management, it's in higher education. There's some, differences within higher education that you wouldn't necessarily see in, let's say, the corporate world. And it's interesting because yes, the skills necessary, or the skill set that one needs to be a successful professor, preferably promoted and tenured in a perfect world, are by themselves necessary to be a chair or maybe above that level, but in and of itself, they're not sufficient. And so it's, to use an athletic analogy, is if somebody wants to be a great coach, Nick Saban played college football. He wasn't an All-American. He obviously didn't make it to the NFL. So while that skill set was necessary to at least understand that perspective of the job, the reason, next to Tom Osborne, I'm a Nebraskan, that he'll go down as one of the best college coaches ever is because in addition to that necessary skill set of having been a player and understanding that culture, he also had the skill set of being a leader, because it's a lot different. And so I use that analogy because I think a lot of people can relate to it. And so oftentimes, and I think we see this outside of higher ed, is somebody, the way we reward them for doing a great job in something that presumably they're really happy in, and it's at that the intersection of their purpose, passion, and profession, is, hey, we really like what you're doing. You're doing a great job. You seem very happy. How about we promote you into a position that you're probably not prepared for, and you might actually, might cause you some mental anguish, and who knows, might even affect your physical health. I think the intent is good, but we can't, I don't want to say this, it's just very, it is how it is. And it's never done with bad intentions. We see it as okay, hey, they were great at this level, but once you cross over, the skill set is completely different, or it's enhanced. So the example I give in higher education, oftentimes our currency across the board is publications. So whether you're at a big school, a small school, if you want to remain current on the market, our common currency is your publications or your grants, external funding. And so the analogy I give is if I'm your chair, Andrea, and we're having a difficult conversation and I'm probably not doing my job and there's some tension, it probably isn't going to make you feel better if I say, well, Andrea, I get you. I'm out of my league here. However, you should know I have 100 published articles and 10 books. Well, is that going to make you feel better in the moment? Probably not. Has that prepared me to mediate conflict between you and a colleague or a stakeholder or a student who has an issue? Oh, probably not. Does it help inform my decisions within the context of higher ed? Absolutely. But it's different. And I didn't fully appreciate that until I became a chair and started having to address those problems and have those conversations.
So what should really good professors consider before they decide to pursue an opportunity in administration?
Well, I think like anything is, what are you passionate about? We all have our sweet spot. Jim Collins in Good to Great calls it the hedgehog. Simon Sinek calls it the golden circle. It's essentially that intersection between what I would call our purpose, our passion, and our profession, because it is important to pay the bills now and then. So it's okay to say, what am I good at? What am I passionate about? And what will they pay me to do? And so I think if you're looking at, should I stay in the professor position? Should I leave and go to another position? is step back and say, what am I really good at? And am I fulfilled here? Don't, money aside, fancy titles in your business card aside, what am I good at? And if I really enjoy and I'm good at working with students and, researching and doing all those things, there is no shame in having what I would say an ego that has been evolved and mature enough to say, I'm good here. But if if your intuition lies in the area of people and processes and problems and all those things that some of us really like and most normal people don't, then it's probably an indicator that, well, you might want to look at that. You might want to look at that aspect of the job.
What kinds of things should somebody who does see that in themselves, they see this in themselves, they're tenured professor, but they're not exactly sure how to get into or to demonstrate those skills. How do they demonstrate those skills so that they become recognizable, so that they are, seen as a leader and chosen for positions like this?
Well, great question. In most educational settings, leadership is influence. And so the most influential people in the organization oftentimes don't have the title of principal, chair, whatever it is. So, for example, one area is there are a lot of opportunities in higher ed to serve as a leader, whether it's chairing committees at the department level, the college level, campus level. I have faculty, and I should say I am very blessed. I tell my folks I feel like the coach of an all-star team. I was given a great set of players, and I just get a sit and let them do their thing. But so there are ample opportunities for people to, if you're interested in that, maybe seek those out. Let your chair, let your dean know, let your connections at the national level through organizations know, I'd be interested in serving on that committee. I would be interested in learning more about that. The first step is I've had a few people that I've said, there's this chair conference. If you're ever interested, I'd be willing to support that travel, because that would immerse you in that culture of chairs, directors, coordinators. We even have deans at that national conference. So I would say, the concept of you can always bloom where you're planted, and start where you're, just be where your feet are, and start serving and influencing in that area, and then just see what it opens up. You might find that you are the best professor leader there is, and that's what you do, or you might find you want to serve and influence in other areas that your current position won't allow.
I wonder about that. I wonder about if somebody is somehow they feel stuck, they're not able to move forward in their current location or their current job. As a professor, as somebody who's in academia, is it hard? I've heard that it's hard to leave academia. Like you're never going to find another job that is going to value your expertise like this one, or things like that. Yeah. Is it even, for somebody who would really like to be a leader, but that door seems to be shut for them. What are your thoughts?
I would say it again. No, it depends on how you define being a leader. Okay. So if somebody thinks, well, I'm only a leader and important if I have this title, well, then quite frankly, I don't know that you'll ever be fulfilled, because, with material things like that, if you're not enough without it, you ain't going to be enough with it.
Sure.
But in terms of somebody, like you said, is for whatever reason, I always use the kind of the tipping point of your vocation versus your location. And so we all fall different areas on that spectrum for reasons that aren't necessarily good or bad. If you can prioritize your vocation over your location, it's probably a little easier, because you can go on the market and say, well, that's what I want to do, and I can pursue that position because that's an opportunity. If you're normal, and as you get older and you have children and you become settled, as that location takes priority over the vocation, then you get into the concept of one of the authors that I quoted, and I was thrilled to have him write my foreword, Walter Gamelsch. He uses a concept of I think he says you can either retire or retread. And so the retreading concept is, what can I do where I'm at to pursue these types of opportunities? Because really what you're after is, do I want a certain experience? Do I want a different interaction? Do I want to develop relationships that I don't have within my current, job description? So I think wherever you're at, you can find those opportunities. But there does come a point to where if you really think that's what you're meant to do, is lead in a different area that comes with, or that requires having that chair title, then at that point, I think you go on the market and you pursue that opportunity.
Okay. People in leadership have to balance many expectations and responsibilities. And so in chapter 2, I'm going to quote you from chapter 2. As a department chair, it is important that you are visible to all of your stakeholders, especially faculty, staff, and students. The informal conversations that you have with others, typically while standing in the hall or the doorway of their office, are a key ingredient to developing relationships and building relational equity. So my question for you is, why is it worth spending your valuable time on building that relational equity?
Because you can't lead or influence people if you don't know them and you don't develop some trust. You just, and again, it doesn't mean that you have to, you still are professional, but that relationship, be it as a chair, as a public school teacher, you name it, if you don't know people, then you really can't influence them. Because certainly in a leadership position that comes with the title and added responsibilities, part of doing your job is you're going to have to sometimes have a difficult conversation. You're going to have to kind of barter back and forth a little bit, be it with that person's time schedule. And if there is nothing there, if I really don't know you, and you, more importantly, aren't completely sure that I care about you, and that, sometimes I'm just doing my job, then it's very hard to lead people. It's very hard to lead them. You've got to have a relationship. And that goes back, as you know, to teaching. If you don't know your kids as a public school teacher, you can't teach them. And again, I like that aspect of my job, and I'm so blessed because the people in my department, because we're teacher education, we all got into this as public school teachers. So I am very blessed, and I think probably have an advantage over other department chairs, is that we get it.
You're working with teachers.
We're working with teachers. We never have to remind ourselves that we're here first and foremost to serve students.
Have you ever seen or talked to somebody who has experienced this situation where maybe there's a contentious kind of situation, a contentious person or spirit? They're resentful, frustrated, whatever. And you as a department chair are kind of playing a mediator role between higher administration and the faculty. How do you navigate that role in the middle?
That in and of itself is the toughest, most challenging, intriguing part of the chair job. I say in the book that it's akin to being asked to not only walk a tightrope, but change your shoes in the process. Because you are the epitome of middle management. I wear multiple hats, because sometimes I have to go to my faculty and advocate for the dean and higher admin. And then at other times I put on my professor hat, because chairs also hold a professor rank, and I have to go to the dean and upper admin and advocate for that. I don't know that, that there's a, simple solution to that, but that is a common part, at least of my job. And can things get contentious? Yes, but it goes back to the question on relationships. Is you truly are building relational equity when you are out, what I call doing your rounds. I make it a point, and thank God, at least on my campus, we look normal now post-COVID. Doors are open again. And I make it a point to do my rounds. I say, just like a physician in a hospital, you get up and you take care of people. And I think the time I spend, the 30 minutes I might spend in a given, round session, just chatting about how they're doing, asking them how their kid's game went, etc., is the return on that investment is far greater than 30 minutes trying to write an email or return a phone call. And so again, not to be a broken record, Andrea, but the more your people know you and you know them, and I don't know if you're a big Brown fan, but I certainly am. And her book came out, I think, recently, and I'm looking forward to it. But the one thing I take away from her is you've got to be vulnerable. You've got to be vulnerable. And so that is how I try my best. Now, we're people, we're messy, we're imperfect. We still have contentious arguments and issues, but I can tell you in my world, while they might be uncomfortable, they're probably more comfortable because we've developed a relationship where at least we know we have each other's best interests at heart.
So you say vulnerability, but I mean, I've had some pushback on, suggesting vulnerability but I'm supposed to be the one who is in charge. I'm supposed to have it all together, all that sort of thing. So why do you think, what in your experience as a department chair, why do you think the vulnerability piece of it is so important?
Because, I can only speak in my world. I work with very, very smart, educated people. Whether I'm trying to hide something or not, they're going to see it. So why try to hide that? Why should we try to make it seem like we also don't feel stress? We also can get angry. We also sometimes don't have all the answers. I just don't think having this, what I would call this drill sergeant militant, this is my way, and I want you to be scared of me, and it just doesn't work. It didn't work as a classroom teacher because I learned the hard way. My default, I growing up responded well to tough coaching and tough love. Most people don't. And I learned early on as a high school teacher that being that militant, my way or the highway, really didn't work. All it did is the kids kept doing that, and probably some of them thought, I was somewhat of a jerk for being that way. So I don't know if that answers the question on vulnerability. And to me, vulnerability isn't like opening your heart about everything or, completely, but it's just this, let them, just like students, let your students know you're human. You're not perfect. You're not going to get it right. Sometimes you need to take a break. Sometimes they need to take a break. Because the other thing is, I think if as a leader, our people come to know who we are as people, they might not always agree with our decision, but there's no guesswork. So if something comes up, like, and I think to our credit in my department, we're very good at this. If there's a question that comes up, most of the people in my department know, they'll ask me, but they're like, well, we probably have to go this way, but I'm just going to confirm. Right. And the same way, I know them. Hey, I have this opportunity. I'm just asking for volunteers. My hunch is you might not be interested, but I just want to run it by you. So I would say that's getting into relationships again. But to me, vulnerability is just being human, developing a relationship, and let them know that you're not perfect all the time. No one is.
Yeah. Sounds a little bit like humility too.
Oh, without a doubt. And I've I've learned humility too, sometimes the hard way, by being humiliated, probably because of a decision I made I shouldn't have. So yeah, humility is also a great trait, because now, as you know, I will say, I grew up just literally down the interstate from where you live.
Yeah.
And growing up in Western Nebraska, sometimes it's a negative, but a lot of times we just are born with this certain sense of humility. It takes it does. I think it's one of the things I love about Midwesterners is sometimes maybe we should toot our horn a little more than we do. And so yeah, humility is very, very important, because I think any leadership job will humble you in a hurry if you don't watch out.
I really, really believe that healthy influence is mutual.
Mhm,
And if we're not able to allow that influence from others in, even those who are trying to influence,
mhm.
that there isn't, it's not, it becomes unhealthy quick.
Yes.
So when there is that humility of, yes, while I might be here and I might need to make some decisions and I'm here to guide and coach or whatever, um, I'm also here to receive. And when people believe that their voice matters with you, there is this give and take that I think emphasizes that humanity, the humility, the um, all that you're talking about. I really think so.
Yeah, it's important. Uh, and you know this leadership. If you're in the people business, I wrote a chapter about that.
Yep.
You are in the people business, and if it doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert, it doesn't mean you have to be, a trained therapist. But if you don't enjoy, developing relationships, getting to know people, talking to them, learning trial and error, all of those things, I think it'd be very hard. I think it would be very hard. And again, it would have been very hard for me to be a successful public school teacher
Mm.
if I wasn't there first and foremost for the kids, the staff members, and certainly in rural America, you do it because you're part of the community, and so
Mhm.
so yeah, I agree. It's very important.
Chris, do you think that being a department chair, being a leader here in the next, I don't know, I guess post pandemic, is this what kind of changes are there to leadership, or should there be, or do you see any shifts?
Oh yeah, it is. I think just about everything has changed. I write. It was important enough. I dedicated a chapter to crisis leadership,
Yes, that was a good
and
chapter.
the analogy I use is using the black light of crisis as a spotlight,
Hmm.
because if we want to look at the benefit to a crisis, it essentially shines a black light on the organization. The things that were there in plain sight, the fissures and the stains and the imperfections, all of a sudden, when COVID hit, certainly in the education world, and we had to go online and shut things down, we
Yeah.
immediately saw where some of the issues were. If we have the courage, the vulnerability, the humility to turn that black light into a spotlight and say, okay, we didn't want this to happen. We hope it doesn't happen again. But where are some areas where now we've seen them that we can improve? I think even though there is now probably more of a debate going on about across the country about remote working and how that looks, I also think the pandemic from a leadership standpoint reinforced, though, the need for relationships, the need for people to come together and talk, have shared experiences. At least in my small world or my department, we really missed that. We missed seeing students in the halls. We missed them popping in the offices. So I think the pandemic as a leader was able to reinforce for me the need for good leadership that's based on culture, relationships. But for me, the big thing, even though we're here talking, on Zoom, is it clearly delineated for me there are times that a Zoom meeting is much more efficient than a face-to-face.
Sure.
But then there are other times that you can only, in my opinion, develop a certain sense of cohesiveness and culture and really get to know people by being in person. So that was it's been one of the big delineations for me. And I learned a lot about myself. Especially in my world, I mean, overnight, we actually, this is not hyperbole. I think we were probably one of the first teacher preparation programs to have to deal with the virus, because we had a student teacher in Wuhan, China.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my director of field experiences came to me and said, have you heard about that coronavirus thing? Well, I've read about it a little bit. This was January, February.
Wow.
Well, who would have ever thought this could happen? But they shut down schools. Oh, wow, that's weird. I hope, that'll never happen here. And so yeah, we addressed that very early on. And luckily, because our program is offered on campus, but also online, we were fortunate that we were very, very flexible and very nimble. But wow, I learned a lot about crisis leadership. I learned a lot about myself. It reinforced the need for self-care. It reinforced the need to be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm not feeling it today. I learned a lot, probably as much about myself as a person as I did as a leader, and continue to do so, because it just keeps unfolding in certain ways.
That's cool. There's a couple things that come up for me when you're talking about that. One of them is that you also talk about in your book the childhood trauma and how we each carry that with us into our day-to-day lives. So childhood trauma compounded with the trauma or the experience of the pandemic, I'm sure, are both important. I love how you encourage people to be so self-reflective in the book. You give so many good questions for people to consider. What about childhood trauma or trauma in general should a leader be aware of when it comes to the way that they interact?
Well, it is so prevalent in who we are, and we've all been affected by it. I don't know if I can plug another book, but one of my colleagues a few months ago suggested a book. It's by Dr. Perry and Oprah Winfrey, called What Happened to You. And there's a subtitle to it. But wow, anyone that works with people, that's so insightful. But I think in my world, we've always oftentimes talked about adverse childhood experiences in the public school. But here's what I learned, and I didn't realize this until I became a chair. So there are some things that until I became a teacher, I was like, oh, I didn't realize that. Some things that until you become a parent. Well, and when I became a chair, I realized quickly, and this isn't to single anyone out that I work with, but just in general, because I talk to other people at other institutions and read a lot about this, is those things that happen in our childhood is we focus so much on them in the K-12 world. And it's almost like we don't admit it, but we think that when that 18-year-old crosses that stage and gets their diploma, that they go away. And they don't. And if we don't deal with them, what happens is they kind of ferment. They actually enhance a little bit. And whether we realize it or not, and full disclosure, I've had to step back, and some mistakes I made early on as a leader, I had to say, listen, you need to deal with that, because this isn't right. Is people bring themselves to work every day, and we can't, when we walk in the office door, we can't separate the personal trauma or anguish, whether we realize it or not, that we have. And so the big takeaway for me as a leader is to keep in mind that 99.9% of the time, the problem's not the problem. And most of the time it's really not on me, and it's not my job, if it's a personal issue, to fix it. And that was very difficult for me at first, because my nature as a teacher, and I think just personally, is you always want to fix it, right? I'm a teacher, I should be able to fix that. And I had to learn I couldn't. But you also, I think it helps you develop a sense of empathy when you realize the person sitting in front of you, the problem sitting in front of you, certainly isn't my fault. And it probably has very little to do with that person today. And it's some things that just we're programmed. Trauma programs us in ways that we don't realize. And there are triggers in the environment that I've even recognized in myself that, after 45 plus years, I realize maybe why I do that. I'm not perfect, but big picture, it's helped me as a leader to realize that trauma stays with us. And just because the adult grows and matures, it's still at that point where it happened in life.
Mm.
And, I'm a former Spanish teacher, and we used to say, in language acquisition that, just because, if you're teaching an adult to learn another language, the phrase that was taught to me is big body, little learner, right? Because they're still a little learner for language. And I look at trauma the same way.
Oh, yeah.
Is big body, but don't let that fool you. We still got a little person there that had some trauma.
Yeah. That's
And
really
again,
good.
I'm not an expert in that area, but I've read enough and have talked to people that know a lot more about it than I do, that my message to leaders, the one takeaway from that is just recognize it's there, and it affects people in ways, the way the brain works when we are triggered.
Mm.
Parts of our brain go into action that, whether we realize it or not, put us in a very defensive mode. And I mean, little things like that. So if someone is yelling at me, well, maybe they can't control it. So again, it's given me, it'll enable you as a leader to extend people more grace and understanding.
Mm. Okay. Another question about
Sure.
what you had recently talked about. You talked about the black light that the pandemic shone on our institutions, on our organizations. And I guess my question is, what do you think the impact is if, when you shine that black light and you, oh gosh, look at that, we see X, Y, and Z are problems. I'd rather not deal with that. Or it's just like, we're so busy, we've got all these other things we have to deal with, and it gets pushed to the side and eventually just sidelined completely.
Mm-hmm.
What is the impact, do you think, of that situation?
Well, I talk about the life cycle of a problem. So problems never go away. They really don't. And so you can either deal with the problem, or the minute you ignore it, you become part of the problem. And that's where courage plays such a huge role. And courage isn't comfortable. I people read this. I hope they don't get the sense that I'm saying, I'm, more courageous than others. I don't know that courage ever gets comfortable. It's just a commitment to continue to do the right thing despite the consequences sometimes. So I would say, with or even within a conflict or crisis mode or outside of it, once we know something's a problem, once it's been called to our attention, then the longer I ignore it, the more complicit I become in the life cycle of that problem. And have I learned that the hard way? Yes, I'm not perfect by any means. I learned early on that I can, if I don't, I need to mow my lawn once a week, because if I fail to, it's going to be a lot harder to get rid of the weeds and the tall grass. So I just consistently do the little things, and it doesn't get out of control.
Right. That's good. I'm curious how university administration could make better use of the wisdom and on the ground experience of department chairs.
Well, I will say, full disclosure, I am tenured, so this is the truth. My current institution at Fort Hays State University, I think, does a very good job. We have 30 some chairs, and I think they do a good job of utilizing collectively our strengths, because they communicate.
I would love to hear, how did they do that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we have really good deans on our campus. The actual physical campus is a typical Division II, 4,500, 5,000 students. So, a handful of deans, but we also are very fortunate online. So our enrollment's large, but it's the best of both worlds, because the residential part is what you and I experienced at Kearney. It's very similar. So what I would say is, and I know from talking to my colleagues on campus, deans, they have regular meetings with their cabinet or their chairs. There is always email communication. Hey, this is what's going on. This is what I learned from the top down. Once a month, we have all the chairs and other leadership people come together for a lunch, and the assistant or associate provost is in charge of that, and he'll either present, or he'll have someone on campus present. So I think in the world I live in, and I've been in higher ed long enough, at least to observe that this isn't the case everywhere. I feel like in my current position as a chair and as chairs plural, I think to a person we do feel heard and we do feel utilized. And I think it's because we communicate, and there's a good number of us. And I think it's just the culture that exists here. Certainly it was happening before I came, and, for however long I'm deemed to be here, it'll happen after I leave. So if I do leave. So yeah, I just think it's because of communication and just the culture that really, I was taken aback in a good way when I started, the extent to which the culture here values department chairs. Not in an arrogant, self-serving way, but just it was different than what I had experienced at other institutions.
That's great to hear. Okay. Student leadership. Okay. So department chairs and student leadership. I would love to hear how department chairs can prioritize. I mean, there's so many different directions you could take student leadership. I'm sure there might already be programs in place for somebody, but maybe there aren't. Or how do you prioritize, or what do you suggest when it comes to student leadership and encouraging that?
Student leadership is first and foremost keeping the main thing, and that's students. We are here to serve students. And I would say one of the, not to, overly advocate for, what I'll call Division II schools in general, but every school has great professors that care about students. In the world I live in, I can tell you one of the really good things about places like Fort Hays and other places I've been is we are student-centered institutions. And so with student leadership, and Andrea, it's interesting, and I hope it doesn't embarrass him, but our Dr. Schnorr was one of the people that I bounce ideas off, usually through like an email or something. And I didn't catch this. And he said, it just occurred to me, you probably have a chapter in you that other department chairs couldn't write. I was like, what's that? He said, student leadership. I was like, oh, yeah, probably should have included that. If the teacher ed person can't write about student leadership, who can? So that was actually a chapter, believe it or not, that as you know from the writing process, flowed pretty quickly. I didn't think I had it in me, but I just sat down and said, okay, well, what would I tell somebody about student leadership? And it's the reason we're here. The two things that we need for anything that's called school to exist are students and teachers, period. I'm not saying the other people aren't important, because they are. God knows the importance of a great custodial staff, a great administrative staff. I'm not saying they're not important. But what I'm saying is we can't play a football game if the lines aren't on the field. We can't have a schoolhouse if we don't have students first and teachers and support staff second. So I think with student leadership is you have to realize as a chair, that's your product. That's who you serve. All those metrics that we collect are meaningless. They have people behind them. They're called students. How do we generate credit hour production? Well, a student has to think enough of your program in your class to enroll. How do we generate foundational support? Well, graduates, their spouses, their children, whatever, a generation down the road have to have had a good enough experience and a connection to you in the school to say, I want to give back.
Oh, that connection is so important.
It has to. People give, you give with your heart. You give with your heart. And the things that probably you and I, when we think back to our undergraduate days, the things that are positive memories are probably because of the people and how they were associated with that place. So student leadership is whether you have a big department. I'm very blessed to have a big department. I like that because we have a lot of moving parts, or a small department. And I write about this is what can you do as a chair? Because you can't teach everyone, but you can affect everyone. So one other thing that my campus does a great job of are these high impact practices that are research-based, meaning small learning communities, undergraduate research, student or service learning. There's 10 of them, I want to say. Most of them, I talk about this in the book, if you start with a good small learning community, you can plug in those other things like service learning, undergraduate research, study abroad, study away, which is staying in the country, but still having a unique experience. And so we've done a lot of those. Full disclosure, I inherited most of them, so I can't take credit. That culture was kind of, here before I got here, and the great people continue it. But those are things you can do, is just, how can we make our students feel a part of this? How do we make sure that they know we care, that we hear them? What's programming that we have? I'll even go so far as to say, and this is the part of me that was trained to be a teacher, certainly in rural America, is if you can be a presence at even your college students' activities, do it. Do it. Go to their concert. Go to the game.
They appreciate that.
Yes. And tell them, hey, even if you just send them, however they communicate now. I know email's probably archaic to them, but I still send them emails, is, hey, great job. That means a lot to them. We had a couple of weeks ago, one of our current student teachers is, I believe, a senior on the basketball team. And I believe she's a starter, really good. The school she's student teaching in, at the elementary school, I didn't know this was going on, but they posted it to social media, is the principal got her kids together and they made signs and went to the game and cheered for her.
Oh.
And I thought, man, that's so cool. What a cool teacher thing to do, right?
Yeah.
So that's another thing, is talk to your students. Hey, how's it going? Now, where are you from? I've stopped students on campus that have a sweatshirt of the high school that I taught at in Salina, probably a couple of years before they were born. But I'll just stop and, just those little things. Hey, I see you're from South. Do you have so-and-so for a teacher? Oh yeah, they're still there. Aren't they awesome? Or I kid kids. If we have kids from Salina visit and I say, what high school did you go to? And they say the other one. I say, well, we can still be friends, but I taught at the other one for 5 years. So I still have a little of those school colors in me. But I'm kind of going on a tangent, Andrea, but I think it's, you lead students by, first of all, serving them, knowing who they are, and making it, and, as a department, you got to make an effort to get to know them. Yeah. And it doesn't mean at the expense of your other things. We're still here to teach, to research, to serve. But just keep in mind that even if it's, hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
How you doing? How's it going? We missed you in class last week. Is everything okay? Those little things make a big difference.
So good. Yeah. I mean, we have this deep impact method, and it's kind of based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, being safe, significant, and challenged. And that when you demonstrate to somebody that I am for you, I respect you and your voice, and I believe in you, that you can go beyond where you're at right now. Like, that is so powerful. And I think you're so right. Teachers do such a good job with this. I mean, that when you're a teacher and you're a leader and that's so good. It's so good. And thank you so much for sharing so much from your book. I'm excited for your book. Where can people find your book?
Well, this was, maybe you had this too. The first time I actually saw my name on Amazon and it wasn't me reviewing a product, that was a cool moment.
Yeah.
It might be like somebody hearing their song on the radio, and maybe it's not a big deal to other people, but the easiest place probably is just go to Amazon.com. I think I'm the only Christopher Jochum on there with a book, and it's in all three, the hardback, paperback, and Kindle, and it can be purchased there. You could also go to the publisher website. It's Roman and Littlefield is the publisher. And they also have it on their site, along with other books. If you're interested in higher ed leadership or K-12, PK-12 leadership, they work in that space pretty well. So those would be the two main areas. I also have a website. It's cjleadership.com. And right now it's essentially a site for the book. So if you go to cjleadership.com, you will also be able to see more about the book and order it. Click on the link there to order it.
Okay, great. Okay, one last question for you.
Yes.
If you could leave our audience who wants to be a voice of influence, wants to have a voice of influence, what advice would you leave with them today?
start where you're at. Start where you're at. If you are a leader, you are an influencer right now. You don't have to wait to arrive. Is what are you passionate about? What is your skill set? Where are your gifts? We all have been blessed with gifts and talents. One way to find those is to say, what am I intuitive? In what areas am I intuitive? Is you lead every day from where you're at. So don't wait for a cause. Don't wait for a title or a promotion. How can I influence people today? And it starts with, in my mind, yourself, where are you at, and relationships. How am I relating to others? And is it in a way that is consistent with what I hope people see as, the character that I want to portray? I'll also say one thing that I learned early on, and I put it in the book, is if you are a leader, you will never have a perfect group of people, and that's okay, because they will never have a perfect leader. So I would say start where you're at. Don't wait. You're leaders now. I've told high school kids this. I was able to speak at a couple National Honor Society inductions the last couple of years, and that was my message to both schools. I call it the myth of leadership. The myth of leadership is we have to wait. No. You lead and you influence every day. You just need to recognize those so you can work in your sweet spot and enhance your gifts.
So good. All right. Thank you so much, Chris. Appreciate you being here, being a voice of influence for our listeners. And congratulations on your book coming out tomorrow, The Department Chair, a practical guide to effective leadership.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Wish you well, and God bless.